Part 1. The line. The morning sun hung low and soft over the city, casting long shadows across the pavement. The governor stood in line at First National Bank, his hands buried deep in the pockets of jeans that had seen better days. The denim was faded at the knees and thin along the thighs, not from fashion but from where he had put these same jeans on 3 mornings in a row now, and each time he had felt a small quiet relief at skipping the stiff suit pants that usually waited for him on the closet door. His jacket was brown leather, once rich and dark, now bleached pale by years of sun and rain. He had bought it during his first campaign, not the big one for governor but the small local race when he still drove himself to events and shook every hand offered. He never imagined he would wear it again for anything but hanging in the back of a closet, yet here it was wrapped around his shoulders as he waited behind a woman studying her phone and ahead of an older man clutching a folded check. No one looked twice at him, no security detail hovered near the entrance, no assistant stood ready with a tablet or a whispered update, no black SUV waited at the curb with its engine running. He was just a man in a line, one of 7 people waiting for a teller window to open, one of hundreds who would pass through these glass doors today. The air inside smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and warm carpet, the kind of smell that lives in every bank in every town across the country. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, feeling the ache in his lower back from sleeping on a narrow cot in a rented room above a hardware store. He had not been home in 36 hours. He had not worn a tie since Tuesday morning. He had not spoken to his chief of staff since he left a single note on his desk. We need to remember what this is for. What this was for was the collapsed bridge on Route 42, the one that had buckled during Tuesday's storm, sending 3 cars into the swollen river below. Miraculously, no one had died, but 2 people were injured and dozens more were stranded for hours. Emergency crews working through the night in pounding rain to clear the wreckage. The governor had stood at the edge of the disaster site that evening, surrounded by flashing lights and shouting officials, listening to the river roar beneath the broken concrete. His staff had arranged a press conference for the next morning, cameras ready, microphones lined up, speeches prepared. He had cancelled it all. Instead, he had driven away from the capital alone in a borrowed sedan. He had checked into the small room above the hardware store. He had walked to the diner down the street and asked for work. They needed someone on the grill. The owner eyed him up and down, saw the worn clothes, assumed he was down on his luck, and put him to work. That first night he burned 3 burgers and undercooked 2 more, but by the 3rd night he could flip a patty one-handed while taking an order and never miss a beat. The tips were small, mostly 1s and 5s stuffed into a coffee can under the counter, but each dollar felt real in a way his salary never had. Now he stood in this bank line waiting to deposit those tips along with his paycheck from the diner. He watched the people around him. The woman ahead of him sighed and tapped her phone screen harder as if force might change the numbers she was seeing. Her shoulders slumped forward the way shoulders do when bad news arrives, quietly without drama. The older man behind him hummed a tune under his breath, something old and familiar, his fingers gently smoothing the edges of his check as if calming a nervous animal. A baby cried somewhere in the back of the bank, a short sharp sound that cut through the quiet hum of the air conditioner. The mother shushed the child, her voice tired but gentle. The governor remembered his own children when they were small, the weight of them in his arms, the smell of shampoo and sleep on their hair. He wondered when he had last held his youngest, not in a photo opportunity with lights and cameras, but just held him because he wanted to. The line moved forward 1 step. The woman ahead of him stepped up to a teller window and began speaking in low tones. The governor watched her hands. They moved quickly, nervous gestures that betrayed the calm tone of her voice. He had learned to read hands during his years in politics. Hands told the truth even when mouths lied. A clenched fist, a trembling finger, a palm pressed flat against a counter. These were the real speeches, the unscripted moments that revealed what people actually carried inside. He thought about the speeches waiting for him back at the Capitol, elegant words crafted by speechwriters about resilience and community and moving forward. He had read drafts of them before he left. They were good speeches, full of heart and hope and all the right phrases, but none of them mentioned the smell of wet asphalt after a storm. None of them talked about the way a person's hands shake when they sign papers for a totaled car. None of them knew what it felt like to count out tips hoping they Total would cover gas and groceries until the next shift. The woman at the teller window stepped back, her transaction complete. She turned and for the first time really looked at the man behind her. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition then confusion. She studied his face, the lines around his eyes, the way he stood, not quite like a politician but not quite like anyone else either. She almost said something then stopped herself, shook her head slightly and walked away toward the door. The governor felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. He had not come here to be recognized, he had come to be invisible, to move through the world as an ordinary person for just a little while. But that flicker in her eyes reminded him that invisibility was a privilege not everyone shared. Some people never got to disappear into a crowd, never got to stand in a bank line without being seen first as their race or their age or their gender or their poverty. He had chosen this anonymity. It was an experiment, a temporary escape for others. It was never an option. The older man behind him stepped forward, now taking the spot at the teller window. The governor moved up one space closer to the counter. He noticed the scuff marks on the floor, worn smooth by thousands of shoes passing through the same spot day after day. People coming to deposit paychecks, to cash checks, to take out loans, to pay bills, to start over, to try again. This floor had witnessed more quiet dramas than any theater in the city, more hope, more fear, more relief, more despair than any government chamber he had ever sat in. He thought about the bill waiting for his signature back at the Capitol, the emergency funding for bridge repairs, for victim compensation, for infrastructure review. It was a good bill filled with necessary numbers and responsible allocations, but it was also just paper until it became something else, until it became a repaired road under someone's tires, a check that kept a family in their home, a crew of workers with steady jobs for the next 6 months. Paper did not fix bridges, people did, and people needed to eat and pay rent and feel safe while they did that work. The older man finished his business and stepped away. The governor was next. He took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the envelope in his pocket. $2,847 in cash, mostly ones and fives from 3 nights on the grill. He had never carried this much cash in his life, not since he was a young man working construction summers in college. Back then the cash had felt like freedom, now it felt like truth. He stepped up to the teller window. A young woman sat behind the glass, her name tag reading Myra. She did not look up immediately, her fingers moving across the keyboard, finishing a transaction from the previous customer. The governor waited patiently, watching her work. She looked tired, not the dramatic tired of someone who had pulled an all-nighter, but the slow, heavy tired of someone carrying weight day after day without relief. Finally she looked up and met his eyes. For a long moment she just stared, then her fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. Her breath caught softly, almost silent, but he heard it. He saw the recognition dawn in her expression, not loud or dramatic but quiet like sunrise. He saw her glance past him toward the door, expecting to see aides or cameras or security. He saw her confusion when she saw only an empty space behind him. She looked back at him, at his worn jeans, his faded jacket, his hands empty of phones or papers or props. She looked at him not as a governor but as a man who had chosen to stand in this line on this morning for reasons she could not yet understand. And in that moment, before she spoke, before he explained, before anything changed, he felt something shift inside himself. Not a decision made but a truth remembered. Leadership was not about the view from the top floor, it was about the feel of worn carpet under your shoes, the smell of lemon cleaner in the air, the weight of cash in your pocket earned one burger at a time. It was about standing in line with everyone else and remembering why the lines exist in the first place. Myra finally spoke, her voice soft, careful, as if testing the reality of the moment before her. "Can I help you today?" she asked. The governor nodded and reached into his pocket for the envelope. He would explain everything in a moment, but first he would deposit his tips like anyone else, like everyone else, because that was the whole point, wasn't it? To remember that before titles, before offices, before power, there was just this one person helping another, one transaction at a time, one line to stand in, one life to live alongside all the others. Part 2: The recognition. The woman who had been ahead of him in line earlier now stood near the bank entrance holding her phone like it might break in her hands. She had not left after her transaction. Instead she had lingered by the brochure stand pretending to read about savings accounts while really watching him. She had recognized something in his face, something familiar from television screens and newspaper photos, but the setting had confused her. A governor did not stand in bank lines alone. A governor did not wear jeans thin at the knees. A governor did not look so tired, so ordinary, so human. Now she approached him slowly as he waited for the teller to count his deposit cash. Her steps were hesitant, like she was walking across thin ice, afraid one wrong move might shatter. The moment she stopped a few feet away, cleared her throat softly. "You look familiar," she said, her voice barely above the hum of the air conditioner. The governor turned toward her. He did not startle or stiffen. He had expected this moment since the first person had glanced his way in the diner. He had prepared for it, not with speeches or explanations but with silence. He let her words hang in the air between them. He let her look at him fully without the shield of title or office. "People say that sometimes," he replied, his voice quiet even. She took one step closer. Her eyes moved over his face, the lines around his eyes, the way his hair fell across his forehead without the careful styling he usually wore on television. She looked at his hands resting on the counter, worn hands with a small burn mark on the thumb from the grill. She looked at his shoes scuffed at the toes from walking city streets without a driver to take him places. "Oh my God," she whispered, "it is you." He offered a small smile, not the wide practiced smile of campaign rallies but something smaller, quieter, real. "Just a guy needing to deposit a check," he said. She shook her head slightly as if trying to clear a dream. Her gaze dropped to his clothes, then back to his face. She was searching for the trappings of power, the invisible armor that usually surrounded important people. She found none. "No security," she said, more statement than question. "What if someone?" "What if someone what?" he asked gently. She did not finish her thought. The question hung unfinished between them. What if someone hurts you? What if someone insults you? What if someone asks for help? What if someone sees the real you beneath the title? She did not know which fear was greater, so she let the question dissolve into silence. The teller finished counting the cash and slid a receipt across the counter. The governor signed it with a pen chained to the counter, the same pen hundreds of people used every day. He did not rush. He did not look toward the door for an escape route. He simply finished his transaction like any other customer. When he turned back to the woman, she had not moved. She stood exactly where she had been, one hand gripping her phone, the other twisting the strap of her purse. "My brother," she began, then stopped, swallowed hard, started again. "My brother was on that bridge Tuesday morning, the one that collapsed in the storm." The governor felt the words like a physical weight. He had read the reports, seen the photographs, heard the briefings, but reports did not have brothers. Reports did not have voices that trembled when speaking of near misses. Reports did not stand in bank lines trying to find the right words to explain how close death had come. "He made it out," the woman continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "The car went into the water, but he kicked out the window, swam to the surface before the current took him. But his truck, it is gone, totaled completely." She unlocked her phone with fingers that shook slightly, scrolled through photos until she found what she was looking for. She turned the screen toward him. The photograph showed a pickup truck twisted around a concrete barrier, metal bent in ways metal should never bend, glass scattered like ice across wet pavement. The front end was crushed flat as if an invisible giant had stepped on it. The woman's brother stood beside the wreckage, arms crossed over his chest, face pale but alive. "Insurance is fighting him," she said. "They say the bridge had pre-existing structural fatigue, that it was not their fault, that he should have known not to drive in storm conditions." The governor studied the photograph. He did not reach for his phone to call an aide. He did not promise immediate action or mention his position or offer empty assurances. He simply looked at the image of destruction and loss and said the truest thing he could think of. "That is not right." Two simple words, no political spin, no careful wording, no deflection, just truth spoken between two people in a bank on an ordinary Thursday morning. The woman blinked rapidly. She had expected something else, a pat on the shoulder, a vague promise, a quick exit to avoid an uncomfortable conversation. She had expected the dance politicians do, the careful steps around real pain. She had not expected stillness. She had not expected truth. You would say that she said not unkindly but not kindly either, just stating a fact like the weather or the time of day. You are the governor after all. He nodded. He did not deny it, he did not claim it proudly either, it was simply a fact like her brother being alive or the bridge being broken. Yes, he said, I am. She studied him again, this time with new eyes. She saw the weariness that no amount of power could erase. She saw the burn on his thumb, the scuff on his shoe, the way he stood without the practiced posture of public figures. She saw a man who had chosen to stand in a bank line when he could have summoned a banker to his office. She saw someone trying to remember something important. Why are you here? She asked. No cameras, no staff, no reason to be here unless I wanted to be here, he finished. He looked around the bank at the people waiting in line, at the mother rocking her baby, at the older man counting coins into a deposit slip, at the young couple arguing softly over a checkbook. He looked at all of them not as constituents or voters or demographics but as people living real lives while he signed papers in an office miles away. I needed to remember, he said softly, what happens after I sign the papers, what happens when the cameras leave and the speeches end. People still stand in lines, people still fight with insurance companies, people still worry about how to replace what was lost. The woman was quiet for a long moment. She looked at her phone, then at the governor, then back at her phone. She made a decision. His name is David, she said. My brother David, he works construction. He was driving to a job site that morning. He had just gotten this truck 3 months before the collapse, payments every month. He was so proud of it. She spoke not to ask for anything, not to make a demand, not to score a political point. She spoke because someone had finally listened without looking at a watch or checking a phone or preparing a response. She spoke because truth had met truth in this unlikely place and something in her needed to honor that moment. The governor listened. He did not interrupt. He did not formulate policy solutions in his head. He simply received her words like gifts. They were heavy gifts full of fear and frustration and love for a brother who had almost died, but he held them carefully. When she finished speaking, the bank seemed quieter, though nothing had changed. The air conditioner still hummed, the teller still typed, the baby still fussed softly in the background, but something had shifted between these two people. A bridge had formed, not of concrete and steel but of shared humanity. What will you do? She asked finally. He considered the question carefully. Most people in his position would say, I will fix this, I will make sure your brother gets what he deserves, I will hold people accountable. But those were promises made lightly and often broken. He would not add another empty promise to the weight she already carried. I will remember David, he said. I will remember his truck. I will remember this conversation when I sit down to sign that funding bill. I will remember that behind every number on every page is a person with a story. It was not the answer she might have wanted, not a guarantee of action, not a direct solution to her brother's problem, but it was honest, and in that moment honesty felt more valuable than promises. She nodded slowly. A small smile touched her lips, not a happy smile but one of understanding, one person seeing another, truly seeing them. Thank you, she said simply. She turned to leave, then paused halfway to the door. She looked back at him one last time. Be careful, she said softly, not everyone will be kind. Then she walked out into the morning light, leaving the governor standing alone at the teller counter. He watched her go, feeling the weight of her words and her story settle inside him. He had come here seeking something, he was not sure what exactly, but he was beginning to understand that he had found it not in grand revelations but in quiet conversations, not in answers but in questions, not in power but in presence. The teller cleared her throat softly. He turned back to the counter. She looked at him differently now too, not with awe or fear or political calculation but with something closer to respect. Your receipt, sir, she said, sliding the paper toward him. He took it, folded it carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket next to his heart. He did not know what would happen next. He did not know how this moment would change the decisions waiting for him back at the capital. He only knew that something had shifted, something important, something real. And sometimes that is enough to change everything. Part 3. The teller. The governor stepped fully up to the counter. After the woman left, he placed his hands flat on the cool surface, feeling the slight vibration of the bank's hidden machinery humming beneath the laminate. He waited for the teller to look up. She was young, maybe early 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her eyes held a tiredness that went deeper than a long shift. It was the tiredness of carrying weight that should not belong to someone so young. She finally raised her gaze and their eyes met. She did not startle or gasp or reach for her phone to take a picture. She simply looked at him, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to quiet recognition to something more complicated, something like curiosity mixed with caution. She had seen him on television, of course everyone had, but television governors wore dark suits and stood behind podiums with flags arranged just so. They spoke in measured tones about budgets and infrastructure and the future of the state. They did not wear faded jackets. They did not have a small burn mark on their thumb. They did not stand patiently waiting for a deposit slip like any other customer. "You are finished with your deposit," she said, her voice even professional. "Almost," he replied. "I need to deposit this as well." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a second envelope, thinner than the first. He slid it across the counter toward her. She picked it up, her fingers brushing against the worn paper. She did not open it immediately. Instead, she studied him, her head tilted slightly as if trying to solve a puzzle that had been placed unexpectedly before her. "Why are you here?" she asked. The question was not rude, it carried no accusation, only genuine curiosity, the kind a person asks when they see something that does not fit the pattern of their ordinary day. "I needed to be here," he said simply. She opened the envelope carefully, her eyebrows lifted slightly as she looked inside, not at the amount but at the nature of what she found. A handwritten note on diner stationery, a few folded bills, ones and fives mostly, and a small photograph. The photograph showed a young boy no older than 6, grinning widely with ketchup on his cheek. She looked from the photograph to the governor, then back to the photograph again. She did not ask who the boy was. She did not need to ask. The resemblance was there in the shape of the eyes, the curve of the smile, the way the head tilted slightly to one side. "My youngest," he said before she could ask. "He comes to the diner sometimes after school. His teacher drops him off on the way home. He sits at the counter, draws pictures on napkins, waits for me to finish my shift." She placed the photograph gently on the counter beside the cash. She did not touch it again, as if understanding it was something precious, something not meant for casual handling. "You have been working at Mike's Diner," she said. "It is 3 blocks from here." He nodded, surprised she knew the place. "My mother eats there sometimes," she said, "on Tuesdays for the meatloaf special." She mentioned a new cook who burns the toast but makes a good burger. She said, "He listens more than he talks." The governor felt something loosen in his chest, a small thing but real. The world beyond this bank was still turning. People were still eating meatloaf on Tuesdays, still noticing new cooks, still living their lives while he grappled with bridges and budgets and the weight of decisions that affected thousands. The teller began counting the money from the second envelope. Her movements were practiced, efficient but slower than before, as if she wanted to stretch this moment, make it last. She placed each bill in its proper slot in the cash drawer, her fingers moving with a rhythm born of repetition. When she finished counting, she did not immediately hand him a receipt. Instead, she looked at him directly, her gaze steady. "My family lives in the Oakwood neighborhood," she said, "the houses near the old mill, the ones with the small yards and the big oak trees out front." He knew the neighborhood not from visits or photo opportunities but from maps spread across conference tables during housing meetings. Oakwood was one of the areas hit hardest by the factory closures 5 years ago. Steady jobs gone overnight, families scrambling to find work elsewhere or patch together part-time hours just to stay afloat. "We have lived there 23 years, she continued. "My parents bought that house when they were younger than I am now. They were so proud. It was the first house on their street with a real garden, not just grass. My mother planted roses along the fence, every color you can imagine." She paused, her hands resting on the counter. Her knuckles were white. She was holding herself together with effort, the way people do when they are about to say something difficult. "The factory closed," she said. "We all know that story. My father found work driving a truck, but the pay is less. The hours are strange. He comes home exhausted. He does not talk much anymore. My mother cleans offices at night. She comes home before dawn. She sleeps while the sun is up. She wakes when it is dark again. The governor listened. He did not offer solutions. He did not say things would get better. He simply let her words fill the space between them. He let her tell her story without interruption. Last month, she continued, her voice dropping slightly, the bank sent a letter. Our mortgage, our house, the payments became too much. After my father's hours were cut, they said we have 60 days. After that another letter, 30 days. After that another 15 days. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him, her eyes glistening but dry. She would not cry here, not at work, not in front of customers, not even in front of the governor. We tried everything, she said. We sold my mother's jewelry, the pieces her grandmother gave her. We took in a boarder, an elderly woman from church who needed a room. We cut everything we could cut. No cable, no internet, no eating out, not even coffee from the shop down the street. My little sister dropped out of community college. She got a job at a warehouse. She is 19. She should be studying, not packing boxes for $10 an hour. The governor felt the weight of her words settle deep inside him. He had read reports about housing insecurity. He had seen charts showing foreclosure rates climbing in neighborhoods like Oakwood. He had approved programs designed to help families in crisis, but reports did not have mothers who planted roses. Reports did not have 19-year-old sisters giving up school to pack boxes. Reports did not stand behind bank counters counting cash with trembling hands while trying to save a home they had lived in for 23 years. What happens after 15 days? He asked, his voice soft. She swallowed hard. The bank takes the house, they change the locks. My parents, my sister, me, we find somewhere else to go if we can. If we cannot, we stay with relatives until that becomes too much for everyone. Then we find a motel room until the money runs out. Then. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. He understood the path she was describing. It was a path many families walked, a slow unraveling, a series of small losses that added up to one large devastation. He thought of the funding bill waiting for his signature back at the Capitol. Advisors would tell him this was not his problem directly. The bill was for infrastructure, for bridges, for roads, not for mortgages, not for families facing foreclosure. That was a separate issue, a housing department issue, a federal issue, someone else's issue. But standing here at this counter looking at this young woman who had spent her life in a house with roses along the fence, he understood something important. Problems do not come in neat separate packages. People do not live in categories. A collapsed bridge affected drivers, yes, but it also affected delivery schedules, which affected small businesses, which affected workers like this teller's father, whose reduced hours meant a missed mortgage payment, which meant a foreclosure notice, which meant a family losing their home. The world was connected in ways policy documents often failed to capture. Tell me your address, he said. She looked startled, not because he asked but because of how he asked. There was no condescension, no performative concern, no hint that he was collecting information for a photo opportunity later. He was simply asking because he wanted to know. Why, she asked. Because I need to remember, he said. When I go back to my office, when I sit down with that bill, I need to remember not just the bridge but the houses near the mill. I need to remember the roses along the fence. I need to remember your sister who should be in school, not a warehouse. I need to remember that fixing a bridge is important, but so is keeping a family in their home. She studied him for a long moment, weighing his words against everything she had ever heard politicians say. She saw no calculation in his eyes, no rehearsed empathy, no hidden camera waiting to capture a moment of connection. She saw only a man who had chosen to stand in a bank line, who had chosen to listen, who had chosen to care. She took a small notepad from beside her computer. She wrote carefully, her handwriting neat and precise. She tore the page from the pad and slid it across the counter toward him. Thank you, she said simply. He folded the paper once, then again, and placed it in his jacket pocket next to the receipt from his deposit. He did not promise to fix her problem. He did not say he would call someone important. He did not offer empty hope. He simply accepted the gift of her trust and tucked it close to his heart. Is there anything else I can help you with today? She asked, her voice returning to its professional tone but softer, now warmer. No, he said, thank you. He turned to leave, then paused halfway to the door. He looked back at her one last time. Your mother's roses, he said. What colors did she plant? The teller smiled, a real smile this time, small but genuine. Red, yellow, pink and one white, one right in the center. She said that one was for peace. He nodded. He carried that image with him as he walked toward the exit, a garden of roses, red, yellow, pink and one white one in the center for peace. It was a small thing, a simple thing, but sometimes small simple things were the only things worth fighting for. He stepped out into the sunlight, the weight of 2 stories now resting inside him, a brother who survived a bridge collapse, a family facing the loss of their home, 2 threads in the vast tapestry of lives his decisions would touch. He did not yet know how he would weave these threads into action, but he knew he would not forget them. And sometimes remembering is the first and most important step toward change. Part 4. The choice. The governor's car was not a car anyone would notice, parked on a side street 3 blocks from the bank, a silver sedan with a small dent on the passenger door and faded floor mats. It belonged to a friend who ran the hardware store below the room where he had been sleeping. The keys were tucked in his jacket pocket next to the folded address and the receipt from his deposit. He walked slowly toward the car, the morning sun warming his shoulders. He did not hurry. He let his feet find their own rhythm on the pavement. He passed a coffee shop where steam fogged the windows. He passed a bus stop where 2 teenagers shared headphones laughing at something on a phone screen. He passed an older woman walking a small dog, the dog stopping every few feet to sniff the same patch of grass as if each sniff might reveal a different truth. These were the rhythms of ordinary life, the rhythms he had signed up to serve when he first ran for office, the rhythms he had slowly lost touch with, surrounded by advisors and schedules and the constant pressure to be everywhere at once. He reached the car and stood beside it for a long moment, not getting in, just standing. He placed his hands on the warm roof and looked back toward the bank through the trees lining the street. He could not see the building from here, but he could feel its presence like a stone dropped in water, the ripples still moving outward from that encounter with the woman whose brother survived the bridge collapse, from that conversation with the teller whose family might lose their home. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He did not need to look at it to know who was calling. His chief of staff had been trying to reach him since yesterday afternoon. The state police were undoubtedly concerned about his safety, though he had left instructions not to interfere. The press office was probably fielding questions about his whereabouts. Cameras would be waiting at the Capitol expecting him to sign the emergency funding bill this afternoon as originally scheduled. He took the phone from his pocket and powered it on. The screen lit up with a cascade of notifications: 17 missed calls, 34 text messages, a dozen emails flagged urgent. He scrolled past them all until he found one number saved simply as home. He pressed call and waited. The line rang twice before someone answered, a voice, tired but warm, the voice of the person who had shared his life for 30 years. "You are alive," the voice said. "I am," he replied. "Where are you?" "I am sitting in a car on Elm Street 3 blocks from First National Bank. I just deposited my tips from 3 nights working the grill at Mike's Diner. I burned more burgers than I should admit, but I learned how to make a decent milkshake. I also learned that insurance companies are fighting people who lost vehicles in the bridge collapse, and I learned that a family in Oakwood is about to lose their home because the father lost hours after the factory closure and the mortgage payments became impossible to make." He spoke without pause, letting the words flow one into the next like water finding its level. He did not edit himself, he did not soften the edges, he simply shared what he had seen and heard and felt. The voice on the other end was quiet for a moment, then, "You went to the bank alone?" "I did. No security. I am safer in that bank line than I have been in months." "How?" "Because people told me the truth. No one was performing, no one was asking for anything except to be heard." One woman spoke of her brother who almost died, another spoke of roses her mother planted along a fence 23 years ago. These are the things that matter. They are not in the briefing books, they are not in the polls, they are just true. Another silence, longer this time. Then, "What will you do?" He looked through the windshield at the street before him, at a delivery truck double parked while the driver ran into a bakery, at a cyclist weaving carefully between cars, at a pigeon pecking at a crumb on the sidewalk. These small ordinary moments held more wisdom than any strategy session he had attended in months. "I will not sign the bill today," he said. The voice did not argue, did not question, did not panic, it simply waited for the rest. The bill is good, he continued, necessary even, but it is incomplete. It fixes concrete and steel, it does not fix the aftermath. The man who lost his truck still fights with insurance. The family who might lose their home still counts coins in a jar hoping to make one more payment. The bill does not see these people because the bill was written in rooms where no one has stood in a bank line lately. So what then? I will draft an executive order, direct disbursement to verified victims of the bridge collapse, bypass the usual channels, cut through the red tape. Insurance companies will not be allowed to hide behind technical language about pre-existing conditions when a state-maintained bridge failed beneath a citizen's vehicle that ends today. He paused, taking a slow breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle into his bones. This was not the safe choice, it was not the politically careful choice. It would draw criticism from some quarters, accusations of overreach, questions about precedent. But standing in that bank line he had remembered something fundamental. Leadership was not about avoiding criticism, leadership was about serving people even when it was difficult, even when it was messy, even when it required stepping outside comfortable boundaries. And the family, he asked the voice on the phone. First National holds their mortgage. He looked down at the folded paper in his pocket, the address written in neat, careful script. He will call the bank's chief executive, not as a threat, not as a demand, but as a conversation. He would ask simple questions. How many families in Oakwood face foreclosure? How many received notices in the past 90 days? How many were given real options before the countdown to eviction began? He would listen to the answers. He would take notes. He would bring those notes to the next housing meeting, not as an afterthought but as the central focus. You are changing everything, the voice said softly. No, he replied, I am remembering what this was always supposed to be about. He ended the call and sat quietly in the car for several minutes. The engine remained off. The world continued around him, unchanged by his decision, yet everything had shifted inside him. He thought of the speeches waiting back at the Capitol, elegant words about resilience and community and moving forward. Those speeches could wait. The people in Oakwood could not. The man fighting with insurance could not. The next family standing in a bank line hoping for mercy could not. He powered on his phone's camera and opened a blank document. He began typing, not with the formal language of executive orders but with the simple, direct words of someone who had spent 3 nights flipping burgers and 1 morning standing in a bank line. To all state agencies involved in disaster response, he wrote, when a bridge falls, we do not just rebuild the bridge, we rebuild the lives interrupted by its fall. Every victim of the Route 42 collapse will receive direct financial assistance within 7 days. No forms requiring legal expertise, no waiting for insurance determinations, no bureaucratic delays. This is not a favor, it is our responsibility. He typed for 20 minutes, his thumbs moving steadily across the screen. He included provisions for temporary housing for displaced families, for mental health support for those traumatized by the event, for small business grants for shops that lost customers during road closures. He wrote from memory the details the woman had shared about her brother, the details the teller had shared about her family. He wove their stories into policy, not as anecdotes but as the foundation of action. When he finished, he attached the document to an email addressed to his chief of staff, to the state attorney general, to the director of emergency management. The subject line read, urgent action required, do not wait for my return, begin implementation immediately. He pressed send. Then he powered the phone off again, not out of fear but out of choice. He needed a few more hours of ordinary time, a few more hours before returning to the world of titles and responsibilities, a few more hours to remember the weight of cash in his pocket, the smell of lemon cleaner in a bank, the sound of a teller's voice describing roses along a fence. He started the car's engine. The radio came on, playing a song he had not heard in years, something from his college days. He did not change the station, he let the music fill the car, simple, honest lyrics about hard times and hope. He pulled away from the curb, driving slowly, careful to signal at each turn. He was not rushing anywhere anymore. He had all the time he needed because he had finally remembered what mattered. And sometimes remembering is enough to change everything.